I'm pulling another whole string down here. The power is off to my left somewhere. If you look up there where the lights are, that's where they unload and load those things. I guess he's picking the cars one at a time from the terminal. Kind of answers one of the questions I had for a long time, and who shuttles the cars around for these guys. And I guess it's got to be the local railroad. Well, look what I found. I don't usually see these guys. I'm not sure what they're going to do. This track here goes up to Messina, I believe, through Potsdam, through Canton, through Governor. And I've seen this train on and off for, I don't know, a year, but I've never been able to catch it. We went sailing through St. Lawrence at like light speed one night. I saw that. So it looks like EMD in the back and GE in the front. So this one here, you saw a little cameo before, and this carburetor had failed. I'm not sure exactly what failed in it, but where I used to go for EL48s, now the 562s have a whole different story. They have this part number right here, right down there, and those are the new carbs. And I guess there's some significant upgrades. For example, I think we had pointed this out before, instead of having the fuel line go into the back of the carburetor through the bulkhead like this, that now faces down and it comes up like a normal fuel line, just kind of comes up through from the bottom. And the other thing that's interesting on the new carburetor, it doesn't have this support ring cast into the body of the carburetor. It has a little brass ring that you stuff into the intake boot and then put the carburetor on top of that. So there's some obvious changes. Not sure why, but it sure fires up easy. So yeah, I just put it on with the common service tool and download the firmware, and now it's a real easy starting saw. So that was obviously the problem. So there's a follow-on. Yeah, I'm going to go out in the woods. But before we go out in the woods, we got this 372 that came in. The guy said it went lean and stopped. It is a 2013 model. So I'm kind of curious as to what we're going to find on that. So let's just bust this thing down really quickly and see if we can figure out what failed inside this saw. Oh boy. This must be one that I glued on. There it goes. What do we have here? Something came apart. Look at that. Come up below. Yeah, bearing failure. All right, let's crack this set of cases apart and see what we have. Pretty much say it's a bearing failure. Well, the leaves are finally turning. It's mid-October already. And if you look all the way up the top there through the leaves, you'll see the signs of a dead tree. So I have to give the Holzfforma g372xt a little more time to be fair. These two saws, they're proven veterans. They don't really need any time, so they may lose their bar and chain. This one here has been used when I was running the excavator to basically cut off the stump, so it's got a lot of dirt time. Chain's kind of whooped. And it's kind of a proven commodity as well. This is that Hyway build. And of course there's my junk pile build. We just finished doing a video on this. Where I want to go with these saws is, you know, it's a little bit of a rebellion for me when you have so much of the online culture defined around having these hot rod shops build your saws, and if they don't have all the special bits and pieces, you know, it's somehow a lesser saw. Boy, there's a bee right on my camera. I wonder if it's going to show up. Is that the 372 has an end date. It's not going to be produced much longer. It's been basically obsolete by the 572, and that combined with the advent of all the aftermarket parts means that saw chassis is going to be around for a long time. And that's really good news for people like us, you know, who are interested in tinkering with saws. And somewhere in between the lowest or least expensive iteration of a 372 and the most expensive iteration of a OEM modified by a, you know, some three-letter porting person, there's a rest of these saws that are interesting and fun and productive. And I want to spend more time with those, not with the high end or the low end. I want to spend time with the stuff that a guy with a tool typical you can buy from Lowe's or a hardware store can accomplish, and have both some fun and a productive saw, possibly more so than a stock saw. This one here, I think is going to be case in point because it's effectively junk. You know, you saw me build it. I'm telling you right now, these are parts I would not put on a saw that would go out in my shop with my name on it. But they are parts I'll use, and it'll pay for itself just today if I get that tree down, bucked up, maybe another one. And they'll cut for a long time. This saw right here has become more important in my channel because it's proving another point, and that is blending some OEM parts, possibly from a blown up saw, with some selected aftermarket parts. You can actually come up with a saw that performs better than a stock saw for not a lot more money than if you had bought one of those complete. You can take your dead saw plus the same amount of money. Let's say that goes for 300 bucks. Take your dead 372X torque, put $300 into it, and you have a saw that'll last just as long as the OEM one did. Of course, that's not a very high bar with the XTs, but perform better. Actually be an increase in performance. My world is I work until I get freaking tired, and I'm looking for a saw with a wider power band, a little bit more easy to use. And if it happens to cut better than a stock saw, well, I like that too. To build a modded saw, you know, with all the bling, you'd have to go spend your $700, $800 on a new saw, and then another $400 to get it ported and made pretty, and, you know, the muffler mods and all that. So now you have $1,000, $1,100 into a saw. I might have $200 into this saw, maybe. And that's the point. And also the access. I mean, anyone can do any of these saws, anything. They're all the parts are accessible. It doesn't require any special skills. It just requires the desire to tinker. And they're fun. And they're things that you can do and have ownership in. There's another layer of satisfaction involved with having ownership in the build. So, like I said, I want to focus more on those in-between saws. This saw is a really strong saw, and I think what I'm going to do is take the other saw, the other two saws like it, and get this thing extracted here, and then do a couple of cookies off of that right there. It's hard. I thought this was dead, Well, it might be, but it's just dead. It's not dead for a long time. So it's really solid. And this guy right here has surprised me because it idles well. It starts and idles. It had a hard time the first time because the choke lever popped off the choke after I turned the choke on. So I flooded it out. Let me see if I can extract these. Whew. May take a little bit of innovating to get that out of there. Yeah, it did some gymnastics once it left the stump. I don't know if the camera picked it up because it hit a branch, it tipped the camera over. Either way, it could be fun. But it's also why I bore cut, and it's also why I clear around the area, and it's also why I exit stage left once I start seeing things move, because you just don't know where that thing's going to bounce. And this one here, because it had those big branches to fall on, kind of kicked it up in the air because it was a strong enough branch that the falling tree wasn't heavy enough to break it, so it kicked the back of the tree up in the air and let it do its gymnastics. So I've got the 3 saws here. I've got the Holzfforma g372xt. Pretty much the only change I made was I put an OEM handle on it because the blocky handle it's on, the one right next to it, I don't like. And the reason I don't like it is it doesn't snap back to idle because there's some kind of a binding going on in the trigger assembly, so it won't just snap right back. And you saw the one next to it in the video I just did with the Madsen OEM top end modified with the crown of the piston slightly modified. It has well, just go back to the video if you're curious, but it's actually a junk pile saw that has some pretty interesting pieces. And then of course on the end is the veteran of Matt Sawyer's world for 6 months or so, being a daily use logger saw, and it has a Hyway 52mm pop-up top end, and it had run for a period of time without an air filter, so God only knows what that bore looks like. Nice running saw, it runs pretty good, starts and idles. It has an XT carburetor, it has aftermarket cases, they all have aftermarket cases, they all have aftermarket bearings. The 2 junk pile builds have OEM cranks, and of course you got the Hyway top end, OEM modified, and then Farmertec top end, so you have 3 configurations there. I guess the reason why this stuff is interesting is because it's in the marketplace, and I think that's a great comparison of kit saw, because that's effectively what that is. You know, something you can replicate either as a complete saw for $300 or a kit. And then these here are blending aftermarket parts with bones of X-Torx. That's the concept here. All legitimate stuff, all things that can happen. And I think the point I want to make is with those junk pile builds, I bet they run good. I suspect they'll handily outcut that one on the right hand side as it comes. Those 2 top ends both bring a lot to the table. So anyway, without further ado, what I'm going to do is make the first 3 cuts with the rocked or barbed wire, in this case chain, on the junk pile build that I just finished doing with the Madsen top end, aftermarket cases. And then I'm going to do 3 cuts with the other 2 saws, and then I'm going to take the chain from the G372xt and put it on the junk pile saw and do 3 more. And that'll give you an idea of one of 2 things. Either what you get with good torque or what you get with a good chain, because if it cuts the same speed with a bad chain as a sharp chain, it's just because it's got that kind of power, you know. And of course you will look at it and interpret it as you see fit. See if it restarts. Now the question is, how long is it going to last? That's the question. All right. Holzfforma next. I don't know if I have to re-choke it or not. Yeah, I guess I gotta choke it. See if it restarts. That's really not a bad running saw, you know. Despite my complaint about the handle that came with it, Hudzel or a used aftermarket handle is pretty cheap, and it's not a bad running saw. And maybe it's because of the summertime, not in the wintertime, but I've had a little bit easier time getting this one to run decent than I did the XP version of what they sell. So this here is actually a legitimate saw. You get a lot of work done with that kind of power. So next. See if this one restarts. That saw right there is a strong saw as well. So I think what I need to do now, shut the camera off and put one of these two chains on junk pile saw and do another set of 3 cuts and see if there's a difference. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is take 3 more cuts with a better chain on the junk pile build with a Madsen top end and the aftermarket case is OEM crank saw, X-Torque carb, and then turn the camera loose and just do some work with it and see if it lasts. But here's my opinion, should I run out of battery before I get a chance to chat about this again, is it's got a lot of power, and so does the Hyway 52mm top end. They're both very strong builds. That Holzfforma XT version, you know, while it may not have the same kind of power, it actually runs good. I think when you're looking at a saw like that, you're not going to look at it in terms of how does it compare to other $500 saws used or $1,000 new. You have to compare it to, you know, those $300 kit saws. And I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. In I don't like the handles that come on these, and you will see on the junk pile build that I did with this handle that came off of this saw, it doesn't come back to idle, so you'll feel like it's running lean. It's really not. It's just not, the handle has got some binding going on and doesn't let the trigger snap back to idle. With the OEM handle on this 372xt, the Holzfforma saw, while it may not be a powerhouse, it makes good enough power and it seems to run pretty good. After a couple of tanks, it seems to have stabilized a little bit where it's not hunting for an idle like it used to when I first got it. My humble opinion on the four 372 offerings from Farmertec, the kit saw, the G372, the G372XP, and then this one here, the G372XT. If I was just to buy one for use, and I wasn't planning on doing anything to it but run it, I'd still think I'd pick that G372 that we first got, even though it may not quite have as much power. But if I plan to do things like with these other two saws, where I want to put like a Hyway top end or do some other things like that, I think I'd start with this one here, the XT, because it has better cases, and we'll find out, but I believe it has a bigger carburetor. I'd get rid of the top end and do something else, but I mean, it's alright. You know, the actual handle that comes with that Huzzle sells, the other one, it's on this saw over here. It's a nice handle. I don't know why they went to this blocky one that's over here. So anyway, let me take my 3 cuts, and then I'm going to run that saw clearing around this tree, and when it runs out of gas, I'm going to pick up the Holzfforma and continue. See if it restarts. How much I like having